Okay, so thank you. My presentation today derives from a broader multi-year research project on cooperative governance that we're working on in the International Centre for Cooperative Management, St. Mary's University, Halifax. And just note in this regard, firstly, that we have a forthcoming edited volume that will be open access with Palgrave, set for December 2022. This is Humanistic Governance in Democratic Organizations, the Cooperative Difference. And it follows our 2021 symposium, which you can watch on our website. So this deals with humanistic organizational theories and practices in terms of the governance systems in all main types of cooperatives, so consumer, producer, worker, multi-stakeholder. And in terms of today's presentation, we have a chapter specifically on worker cooperatives in the US, in Cuba, in Mondragon in the Basque, and the Secretazola cooperative, notably in Venezuela, which recently won the Right Livelihood Award, the Alternative Nobel Prize. So a quick overview of the paper. I'll just run through the motivation, the theoretical framework, and the methodology relatively quickly before we spend some time on the case studies and the paper. This is ongoing research, I should say. So I'll indicate some findings and some future and ongoing research. So the motivation from our perspective is the lack of a compelling theory of worker cooperatives, which kind of captures all the key aspects of their governance. And in particular, the dominant neoclassical economics inspired theory of the labour managed firm has run up against empirical challenges in recent times, particularly to its so-called degeneration thesis that worker co-ops will, necessarily fail within a capitalist environment. And there is secondly, a relative dearth of qualitative case study analyses into long-run worker co-op regeneration. So the literature is focused initially on a priori theorizing from a neoclassical perspective, and later on it focused on quantitative and statistical empirical analysis, but there was very little feedback between these two literatures that would lead to a new, more coherent theory. So we're trying at least to deploy a kind of interdisciplinary, multidimensional approach, which draws together heterodox strands within the economics, management, psychology, sociology literatures, broadly speaking. And we land on something approximating a paradox perspective on organizational and cooperative governance. So the idea is really to try and negotiate and manage tensions such as between collaboration and control within the organization, rather than looking for one-size-fits-all unidimensional solutions. And we're trying to kind of supplement this with humanistic micro-foundations and institutionalist macro-foundations, again, drawn from kind of heterodox economics, social science literature. The methodology for the study is mainly in-depth semi-structured interviews with propulsive and snowball sampling, where we try to identify key governance personnel within worker cooperatives, and we engage them rounds of engagement, if you like, and they've been involved even in writing the case studies. There's the theoretical framework and document analysis frame our interview guide, and in particular this is structured around Eckert's approach to organizational structures, participatory democratic processes, and change management dynamics. And it's a multiple cross-case analysis where the idea, at least, is that we have a theoretical framework that helps us organize the study, but then the empirical results are to feed back and reconstruct the theory. So it's an iterative kind of methodological approach, which is easier said than done. So our case studies are identified on the basis of the reputation for successful democratic and participatory governance cooperatives with a long-standing history of overcoming challenges to the co-op identity. Now, the four cooperatives clustered on the left-hand side here are all broadly in the retail and wholesale sectors, while those on the right-hand side, maybe more surprisingly, are clustered in kind of capital-intensive, high-tech, custom automation, manufacturing and engineering. And just to focus on a few of these cooperatives and please don't, if you can even read this, don't get lost in the detail. But SUMA is a whole foods wholesaler, a vegetarian whole foods wholesaler in Halifax in England, and they've been around for over 40 years. And in that time, they've grown their worker membership to upwards of 250 to 300 workers. And they operate on a pretty flat governance basis. They've developed some structures over time, but everyone is paid the same wage, which is about double the industrial average. And they've somehow still managed to remain very competitive in terms of their productivity and profitability. In fact, the envy of their competitors in what's a increasingly competitive industry. So you can see that up on the top left, they've developed a board of directors, but at the same time, they've put a check on this power by developing a dual board structure, a member council. And on the member council, there is a representative from the trade union committee, the Bakers, Food and Allied Workers Union. And then in their operations, there's no general manager in this quite reasonably large organization. There's no general manager, there's no managers per se, there's elected coordinators who direct on the basis of kind of consensus building. And there's a degree of delegation of powers, but it's very much a living democracy. So to take a different industry, this is Combo in France. Again, there's a lot of detail in the structure here, but they're a little more conventional. About 80 worker members. Again, obviously more capital intensive. There's a board of directors and there's a general manager, but there's a mandated, basically a works council, the social and economic committee, which has representation from the union. And there's a collective bargaining agreement, so negotiations between the union and the general manager, the union representative. SUMA, who we just discussed, interestingly, have a union who they've just decided to recognise and have nearly always been unionised, but they never had a collective bargaining agreement. Interesting, and Combo recently won an award off the French National Association of Worker Cooperatives for their system and operations of mini-SCOPs, or what are basically autonomous work teams. So very decentralized participatory operations. And members of these mini-SCOPs also contribute to governance committees. To get maybe even more democratic about it, the Unicorn Retail Cooperative, which is one of SUMA's main customers, they deploy a system of sociocracy where all worker members are on the board of directors. So again, there's about 80 or some of the Combo, 80 worker members on the board of directors. And then there's a division of labour outside the general meeting where they take part in governance circles, about 9 members in each circle, which they see as human sums of things. Consent, if not necessarily consensus. So you try to get everyone to go along with something that's good enough for now, even if you don't agree. So you see there's a lot of diversity here, but there's some indicative findings that, the results have all been keeping with the humanistic organisation in theory and previous case studies, although there are a few on general what we call governance. In particular, we observe, generally speaking, a network governance structures involving polycentricity or multiple control centres, checks and balances, as well as multiple stakeholder participation on these bodies. There's also what's often become complex responsive processes of relating, in other words, healthy social communication with the organisation based on education and conflict resolution processes. So a lot of resources go into this. And then adaptive change management dynamics, which involves regular governance review and renewal. Sometimes this is an ad hoc basis, but then becomes more institutionalized over time. And finally, there's a cooperative human organisation and culture trying to intergenerational organisation who is see over these decades very successful succession in terms of younger and newer worker members coming through in the organisation and maintaining a very healthy relationship with the community and the policy. But I should say that obviously, as you've seen in those organizational charts, there's a lot of variety within these general principles. More labour-intensive cooperatives that maybe are in a single site where you bring everyone together for a general assembly. For everyone to come together for a general assembly, for example, something like social democracy, very direct democracy, seems to work very well. Whereas if it's more capital intensive, greater labour segmentation, for example, you might get something that's a little more conventional in terms of management and both roles. So suffice to say, for now, I still have to do a lot of work on systemizing kind of cross-case analysis, which first of all means we need to finalise the remaining cases, and we're working on that. And finally, something that keeps picking up on us is the role of trade unions is kind of contradictory role